Bogolo is an African economist with expertise and years proven experience in trade and investment policy, industrial development policy, macroeconomic policy, public finance management, regulatory framework and reforms, and private sector capacity building and development. Bogolo has delivered projects and consultancies for governments, including Botswana, Ghana, Rwanda. She's also had worked with international development partners such as the World Bank, DFID, Southern African Development Community, United Nations Development Program, and private sector companies like Botswana and Botswana Stock Exchange. Bogolo is a gender and youth activist, active for 15 years, advocating for the inclusion of young people, in decision-making in Botswana and the rest of Africa. She served as Botswana's first youth representative to the United Nations and a global representative for the other countries' representative to the Secretariat. She has lobbied and subsequently passed legislation toward the protection of children and women's rights. Bogolo is the former Minister of Investment, Trade and Industry for the Republic of Botswana, and she successfully led the transformation agenda for the ministry and introduced a strategic purpose apex model around SMME development, investment attraction, and export development. So you can see with her bio, she's really able to share with us great insights around how the AfCFTA implementation will lead to sustainable trade and development. And so with that, I'd like to go ahead and welcome Mrs. Bogolo Kenewendo. Thank you very much for taking your time today to just be here with us at the Second Africa Trade Conference. And I welcome you and thank you. Welcome.
Thank you very much, Anne. I haven't heard some of those things that you mentioned in my introduction in a very, very long time. For a moment, I was wondering, who are you talking about? But in any case, thank you very much for having me. Good to be joining you from Sharm el-Sheikh, and we are right in the middle of the first week of COP27. And it's been a really interesting, excuse me, it's been a really interesting COP27, so much energy around the continent. As most of you might know, COP27 has been deemed an Africa COP or an implementation COP, a COP from summits to solutions. And I believe that that is just to highlight that there is a very urgent need for implementation and a very urgent need to start investing in sustainability. And there is an urgent need to make sure that we are unlocking finance for sustainable development. And one of the things that have been really interesting over the past couple of months, as on the lead up to COP27, has been this recognition of climate action as being part of sustainable development, which means really focusing, looking at climate action as a catalyst for greater development, looking at climate finance as a catalyst for financing for development and not just an end in itself. And that, I believe, has been really crafted out of the recognition of African issues, particularly because if over 600 million people do not have electricity, that means they are left out of the economy and out of economic participation. And so the recognition of climate action and climate finance as a catalyst for development has been very key, because it tags on the issues around the Paris Agreement of our common but differentiated responsibilities, which means we know we have an issue, we must protect the earth, we must reduce emissions, but we recognize that not all of us have created this problem, and not all of us are at the same level of development or benefited from those emissions. And so that has been quite crucial to keep mentioning, so that we inspire more finance for development into the continent. And another last point that I want to mention, and it will all come back into the AfCFTA is this big push for more investment, more climate finance that is focused on investment instead of just aid going into some other issues that have not necessarily been selected by the communities. And we are seeing a very increased and strong play of non-state actors, particularly in the continent, around really galvanizing this movement on climate action. And at ACW a few months ago, the Africa Climate Week, we hosted a session specifically on trade and finance, advancing trade and finance and the implementation of the AfCFTA through climate finance. And we recognized the state of value chain development and a green development pathway in relation to the AfCFTA. We had the utmost pleasure of being joined by His Excellency Wamkele Mene, the SG of the AfCFTA. Now, to reverberate what he mentioned during that particular session was recognizing that while the AfCFTA in itself doesn't necessarily have sustainability clauses, we recognize that Agenda 2063 in itself is deeply rooted in sustainability. And so development for the continent has to be based on, or we have to have a strategy around a green development pathway, which essentially means we recognize, one, that the AfCFTA in itself as a principle is actually a climate action move. And just to explain what that is when you plan on reducing the footprint of your raw materials and you're working on value chain development, you are nearshoring, you are reducing the emissions that are associated with trading on the raw materials, you add value, and you start to trade with those that are much closer to you than across the Atlantic and so forth. So AfCFTA in itself is a climate action move, and as a result, climate finance must be part of must certainly be part of trade finance, must certainly be part of climate finance. I have been talking so much about finance in the last 3 days that things are starting to jumble up in my mind. Yesterday was Finance Day here in COP27. So linking to the recognition that trade finance must be part and parcel of a key climate finance agenda, we have seen as a result many African companies and businesses coming together to really point to that there is a need for aggregation in the continent. Now, to give you an example, yesterday, during Finance Day in COP27, we had some landmark commitments made by African companies and African non-state actors. There was a clear aggregation of African businesses, and they came together from over 50 countries. And we're talking over 60 of the largest African businesses came together to create what is called the Africa Business Leaders Coalition. And these companies employ over 1.5 million people in total across the continent. And they made a landmark commitment towards financing adaptation and resilience in the continent. They made a landmark commitment to key actions on meeting the goals of the Paris Agreement, to supporting Africa's just transition towards a 1.5 degrees future, to building a thriving continent rooted in a resilient, green and competitive economy with opportunities for our youth and future generations. And this is a landmark commitment by the private sector in COP, by Africans, but this is clearly very inspired by the progress that has been made through the AfCFTA. We started on the implementation of the AfCFTA, and just about 2 weeks ago, we heard that there has been conclusion on the protocol on investment. There is progress, and it's very encouraging to hear that the private sector in itself has started moving forward and recognizing that aggregation and coalitions are the way to go in order for us to make sure that we have greater impacts and we make more way towards this green development pathway, and as they mentioned in that statement, green and competitive economy. Now, the second thing that really reverberates around the idea of the AfCFTA is the Nairobi Declaration on Sustainable Insurance. This insurance industry in Africa also made a very big commitment and announcement yesterday around around their recognition of the African insurance sector's triple role as key climate mitigation, adaptation agents, risk managers, risk carriers, and investors. This is important because it's over 85 businesses in the insurance industry, insurers and reinsurers coming together once again in a similar pattern as encouraged by the AfCFTA to make commitments towards ensuring that we are building resilient economies. Now, the sector does so, speaking to this commitment, they made it through an Africa Climate Risk Facility, and it does so towards a commitment of a $2 billion Africa Climate Risk Facility. And this risk facility will fund and transfer a value of $14 billion of risks from the most vulnerable African populations through sustainable insurance solutions, and to address climate and nature-related risk, protecting over 1.4 billion people cumulatively in Africa, but annually about 140 million people in increment between 2023 and 2030. This is something that is very commendable because, as you know, there are many risks that are already associated with investing in the continent, and some of them deal with governance. And one really crucial risk that every investor will be thinking about is the increased vulnerability of doing business, the increased vulnerability of Africa to climate shocks. And so this facility will help to deal with de-risking doing business in the continent, given the increased vulnerability of the continent to climate shocks. This is something, again, that I feel really strongly points to progress associated with the AfCFTA, because after all, the AfCFTA isn't about the Secretariat in Ghana. The AfCFTA is a people's project and will only move faster if non-state actors start to play a role in it and recognize that aggregation, coalitions, and coming together as a continent, working together is the way to go and to ensure that we have a faster development. Now, as I conclude, I just want to once again thank you, Anne, and your team for hosting us today. And I hope certainly that you will have the most fruitful deliberations. And as you do, please keep in mind that we do have a common agenda of the Africa that we want. And that common agenda is deeply rooted in sustainability. And sustainability is not a new issue to the continent. Sustainability is actually deeply rooted in our indigenous knowledge and in our indigenous practices. Everyone across the world now, as they speak about climate action, they are talking about regenerative agriculture, which is something that we know that we've been practicing for decades. We moved away from it because we thought we were modernizing, but now everybody else is coming back to the practices that were founded within our traditional practices in the continent. Sustainability is deeply rooted, once again, in our indigenous knowledge and indigenous practices. Conservation is not a Western thought. Conservation is an African thing. And nearshoring is truly an African thing. So as you go through your 2 days, please do keep sustainability at the heart of these conversations. And remember that we can craft and we can take back the narrative of sustainability and be leaders in crafting the way forward for development and leading in this green development pathway. Thank you, Anne, and back over to you.
All right, thank you very much, Bogolo, for that amazing keynote speech. I liked the fact that you reminded us that when we talk about sustainability, it's really going back to our indigenous knowledge. It is really ingrained in us as Africans. It's not something outside that is being put on us. It's something indigenous that we have. And so we need to continuously focus on conservation, because if we want the Africa that we want, as African, we understand the importance of climate, of land, of the earth. So thank you very much for reminding us about that and all the work that is happening really around climate action, green economy, and why coming together is very important for us as Africans, especially business leaders who are pushing the agenda and seeing the progress that the AfCFTA is ensuring happens so that we see the Africa that we want. And of course, reminding us that the AfCFTA is the people's project. So all of us, especially the business community, needs to be all hands on deck to make sure that this particular thing happens. So thank you again, Bogolo. We do have a few minutes for some questions around trade and development, which of course was the focus here, and really around sustainability. Let me see if we have a question from the audience. Let's see here. I don't see a question from the audience, but for me, Bogolo, you mentioned so much around climate. You mentioned about the Africa business community and especially what has happened with the Leaders Coalition being something that has come out of COP27. Maybe a question I would ask is to say, when we're talking about sustainable trade and development and really focusing on climate and knowing that a lot of what's going on in climate change is not caused by us as Africans, but it's something that we have to deal with, especially because a lot of our economies are agriculturally based. Could you share with us your insight or a little bit more of what came out from COP27 that not only governments need to do, but Africans on the continent? What more can we do to make sure that even though this problem of climate change has not been caused by us, we are on the forefront making sure that it does not affect us and the generations of Africans to come who really are sustained by the earth, and agriculture is key in what you could do. So maybe you can spend a few minutes on that, and then we will end this session on your keynote. Thank you, Bogolo.
Thanks, Anne. So one, if it's member states, is to recognize the very crucial play by the private sector and civil society in delivering and the implementation of the nationally determined contributions, which is essentially like the work plans of climate action for every country. And what we have been encouraging is for our member states to have investment plans that accompany those NDCs, so that when the private sector wants to invest in these things, they understand exactly how much is needed and what the terms of engagement look like and so forth. So that is one thing that has become really crucial for African countries to do. But secondly, for private sector in itself is to recognize that there is big business and big money in sustainability at the moment. Climate finance has grown about 15 times in the last 5 or so years. And this certainly is an opportunity, and we need to position our businesses in such a manner to benefit from climate finance. Unfortunately, while there's been an extensive growth, exponential growth of climate finance in the world, only 3% of climate finance has made it to the continent. So we must position ourselves better to be able to benefit and increase the flow of climate finance from 3%. To be clear, climate finance shouldn't only be flowing from outside into the continent. There's an opportunity for us to even turn our capital into green capital, focused solely on delivering on green development and green industries. Big opportunity there. Big opportunity around exporting green products, organic products, sustainable products. So we should all really just make sure that we are aligning and preparing ourselves for what is soon going to become a norm. Back to you, Anne.
All right. Thank you again, Bogolo, for again reminding us big opportunities, big business, big money. Big is the keyword here. And I know for a lot of the business leaders here, the business owners, that's music to their ears, that there is big opportunity, and the keyword here is sustainability. So thank you again, Bogolo, for taking your time out of your busy schedule to come and share with us your great insights about the opportunities that are going to be going on and really why we need sustainable trade and development on the continent. So thank you very much. We appreciate you, and we look forward to the great work you continue to do on the continent and beyond. Thank you very much. All right.